not only was Justin Khan there, but he invited a lot of his friends in. So we had the co-founders of Reddit were there, co-founders of a couple of other large startup businesses in San Fran. And so, just one to go over and kind of see what the top end of the startup space was in America was pretty incredible. In 2 or 3 years, that had flipped, and I'd gone to the teacher and she'd gone to the student.
In today's episode, we are joined by Dom Woolrych. He's the founder and CEO of LawPath, a multi-million-dollar and global legal software platform for small businesses. Dom founded LawPath in 2014, which is now one of the top 50 fastest-growing businesses in Australia and recognized as one of the top 50 legal startups globally. Dom has previous experience at the International Court of Justice, the Public Interest Advocacy Centre, and international commercial law firm Minter Ellison. In our conversation, we explore Dom's motivation behind starting his own business, his journey through venture funding, and the core principles which have propelled LawPath to its meteoric success. So without further ado, I'm Aryan Jani, and this is Beyond the Name, a podcast dedicated to hosting authentic conversations with the world's most inspiring, successful, and interesting.
I have once met you before. You appeared on a panel that we had for the UNSW Law Society. And I think in the lead up to today's podcast, I think, I tried to do a little bit more research, into, who you are and where you're from and what your background is. And I think what I found, not necessarily surprising, but I think notably similar, was that all the sort of various profiles and articles that were sort of based around you online, which there are quite a few, if you've ever sort of done a bit of a self-Google, but I found that a lot of them did focus obviously a lot on your sort of founding and being CEO of LawPath, as it is obviously something that is quite interesting and quite impressive. And I think why I'm really keen to sort of get into the LawPath side and talk about that if we do get the chance, I'd actually love to just start with you, if that's okay. What does high school Dom look like? Are there sort of any key moments or events that you think really impacted who you are today?
Well, look, great to be here. Yeah, you're right. If you haven't Googled yourself recently, I don't know if you're human. So yeah, don't worry. I've Googled myself many times. So like back to high school Dom. So I went to high school here in Sydney, Australia. I went to an all boys high school. We were very focused on sport and music. I was really, really big into music. Played in a couple of different bands. I kind of thought that, I was going to be a famous rock star in the future. So I don't know. I think I was just like real, pretty typical in terms of schooling. I don't think there was anything that really made me too different from anyone else. I think one thing that kind of led me down the path that I've gone down, especially around helping small businesses, was my dad ran a small business, and I got a lot of insight into how that business ran and what the challenges were. And I think that always stuck with me, even though I went off to university and became a lawyer at a large firm. That always stuck with me, that there's a lot of small businesses out there and they do a lot of things themselves, and it can be really hard to run. And so I always, in the back of my mind, thought that was a big problem that no one else had really tackled. I think I can't really surprise the audience with any like crazy childhood stories. I did have a lot. LawPath is not my first business. I've had a lot of businesses before. I started my first business when I was in year 11. That was selling secondhand clothes at markets. So my friend and I, we would go and raid the Vinnies for all the secondhand Levi jeans and things, and then go to the markets at 3 a.m. in the morning and get the best spot and then resell them. And I love that. We didn't make much money. I don't even know if we made a profit. I think we just broke even each time, but I loved doing that. And I think that's probably where a lot of my later on, when I started running more serious technology businesses, I loved that feeling of like of buying and selling and speaking to customers and providing a solution or a service. So yeah, that was kind of my high school years.
Did you always think you were going to end up, I guess, owning your own business and doing all these sort of entrepreneurial journeys, I guess, when you were in high school? Was that always the end goal, to end up owning something of your own? I think especially with a dad who owned his own business. Like, I have a dad who owns his own small business, and he tells us all the time, like, the end goal always is to, own something yourself. Is that something that he, I guess, consciously tried to instill in you, or was it something you sort of just picked up and realized that you enjoyed that aspect of the things you were doing a little bit more than perhaps just day-to-day work at a law firm?
Yeah, I think I don't know if it was ever explicitly said, but the reason my dad started his own business was because he wanted to be able to control his time and spend time with his kids, and he'd worked in a corporate environment for a really long time, and just thought there was more than that. And so maybe without telling us, I'd always kind of wanted to go down that path. I think that if you kind of map out your life, you think about, what I do anyway, you think about it in stages, and you think what am I going to do in my 20s, what am I going to do in my 30s, what am I going to do in my 40s? And I knew that I wanted to always end up running my own business, but I felt like there was a lot of maybe 2 decades in between where it was a very good idea to go out and get experience. And even if you want to end up doing your own thing, there is no substitute for working at one of the large companies out there. The reason that they're large is because they're run really well. And so it is really great to go and learn about how they work. I mean, they have all their problems, but at the end of the day, they are the systems, they're the ones that have refined the systems down to the point where they're hyper successful and profitable. So yeah, when I left school, I was deciding whether I should go to the con to do music or to do a business degree. And maybe like the boring lawyer Dom one in that situation where I thought I better go and do a business degree because that will set me up for life. Well, set me down a path that I thought was probably more sustainable. And you get a lot of peer pressure through those years. Your friends are going to university, your parents are saying you've got to go to university, and I look back now and I think I don't regret the path I take, but there are so many paths that you can take. It doesn't have to involve going and going to uni, and there are so, my work now, I meet so many awesome entrepreneurs and solo entrepreneurs that finished high school and jumped straight into running their own business and have been very successful. So at the time I felt very pressured to go down that path, but in hindsight, I don't know whether that was the only way to go.
I think you've spoken a lot about there's no substitute for going to the big firm, maybe just from an experience standpoint, I guess doing your sort of initial years of training. What does quitting your job in that way look like? I think, is it how daunting it is to leave that kind of a position and then start up your own thing? Was it a smooth transition? Was it, what does day one of LawPath look like? Does it look like only starting once you've quit, or was there maybe a period where you were sort of doing a little bit of both and experimenting between which one you were going to sort of continue into the future?
Yeah. It is, when I speak to founders or people that are running side hustles, this is the question that everyone struggles with. And there's 2 very well thought out, both correct schools of thought. Is it do I build up my business on the side whilst I've got a 9-to-5 job that's generating revenue and generating me a salary, and do I keep it to a point where I'm safe and then I can swap over and I kind of do the transition and I never lose out so that I can pay my rent or my bills or whatever? And then, which seems like a really safe and clever idea. And then the other school of thought is, you're not going to push yourself as an entrepreneur or as a small business owner unless you put yourself in a situation where it's death if you don't get it done. You need that pressure to go out and really make it work. For me, I worked at, I finished high school, went to university, did a business degree, then I transferred over into a law degree. And then at the end of my law degree, I did a clerkship, which is one of these kind of internship programs with one of the large law firms, and then ended up going in and working in that law firm for a couple of years. And I loved that. I really enjoyed working there. I could have, I saw myself staying there for a really long time. But as I started to work more and speak with clients, and I just started to feel that there was this big opportunity in law that no one was really tackling. And I was starting to look at all these other industries, and there was a lot of software coming into them. They were moving to online self-serve technology platforms, and they were helping small businesses, specifically the accountants. And I really felt like that legal had a big gap, and that gap could be filled by some of these platforms. So, I made the leap, and that was, so I did the latter. I just said, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to make the leap. And I think I was probably in a unique position. I was mid-20s. I was, living in a share house. I didn't have that many commitments. I didn't have children or, a partner or a mortgage. And so I was, relatively free to make these kind of stupid decisions. And so, but obviously I loved the fact that I did that, and I don't regret it. But again, coming back to the kind of pressure you get and the peer pressure, at the time that I left, it seemed crazy to others in the firm that I would jump ship. I had done all this work to get into the one of the highest performing firms, and then you jump ship. I think even I did that almost 10 years ago now. I think even since then, a lot of the stigma's gone from people leaving large traditional firms and starting their own thing. But probably for the first few months I was thinking about it, everyone I would speak to said, no, don't do it. You're onto a good thing here. And then after I'd left, everyone who I spoke to said, like, why did you do that? You were onto a good thing. But I think the really exciting thing now is, especially in legal, which is our space, is that there's more and more people leaving larger firms. There's more and more people going out on their own. There's more and more resources and structures so people can go out on their own. And so it's now become pretty commonplace that you hear about people leaving a large firm, starting up their own boutique law firm, or more specifically coming into legal tech. I call it rise of the marketplace, or there's now systems and structures in place that people can go out and run their own business with a couple of team members and run a really good, successful law firm, if that's what you want to do. 20 years ago, you needed the library, the practice management system, the billing, the assistants. To start a firm, you needed all of these resources. Now, I can grab a Xero subscription, a LexisNexis subscription. I can grab all these subscriptions that cost me a couple of $100s a month, and I can run my whole firm online. So I think that's really exciting. We're in a little bit of a different space. LawPath is an online legal platform for small businesses. We're purely technology based, so we're the software rather than the lawyers. But I don't think that really changes. If you're leaving a traditional career and going and trying something new, no matter what you're going into, it's always very daunting, and most people will tell you not to do it. But I think there's some really great examples out there now of people that have done it that have been really successful. And, speaking frankly, I think my career has really accelerated since I left the firm. And I think that may be due to the fact that in these large traditional workplaces and even large traditional industries, there's very much a well thought out path and cadence to how you succeed and how you progress. So by that I mean, you come in, you're a junior lawyer, then you move to an associate, you're an associate for 5 years, then you move to senior associate for 10 years, then you move to partner. And, I'm sure that process moves faster for extraordinary people that can, but if you're an extraordinary lawyer, you may be only an associate for 4 years, not 5 years. And you may be only an SA for 7 years, not 10 years. And so there is still this traditional path you have to go through. What I think is a really awesome opportunity for people is that once you move outside of that structure, you can advance your career. And I don't know if this validates this theory that I have, but I have this awesome story, which is I used to have a partner in the law firm who I worked under, and she was very senior, and she was an amazing partner, but there was probably 10 layers of lawyers between me and her. And so I would go to presentations and she'd be the one doing the presentation. So I started LawPath, and a couple of years in, one of the law societies wanted me to come and do a presentation on legal technology. And I walked into the room and she was sitting in the front row. And she'd come to learn about legal software and legal technology, and I was the one doing the presentation. And I just thought it was so interesting that in 2 or 3 years, that had flipped, and I'd gone to the teacher and she'd gone to the student. And so that kind of showed me that if you are willing to take the risk and move out of the traditional system, you can advance your career. I'm in my mid-30s, now running a software, a multi-million-dollar software business, 75 team members. I don't know if I would have had that level of responsibility or level of seniority if I'd stayed in the law firm.
Wow, I think that's an incredible story. I can't imagine seeing, a partner you worked under be in the crowd of a presentation that you're giving. I guess I can only imagine. I think the point you bring about, accelerating a career, is an interesting one. And I think it's probably one that a lot of my audience will resonate with. Is obviously a lot of people are in this point where they're sort of looking to see what are the best opportunities out there. And I guess a lot of people are deciding that for them, big law is not really the answer for that. When I was doing a bit of research, into LawPath, some of the experience that I thought were interesting that perhaps you wouldn't get at a law firm is, I know that LawPath did receive a bit of funding in the early stages to sort of get it, at certain stages to get funding and grow it into other international markets. Could you maybe talk us through what that process was like, navigating it as not really someone who I presume had a lot of experience in that sort of venture capital or raising funding kind of space as a founder, and going through that and how you navigate that kind of a situation where your experience is more legal, but you're in a situation where obviously this is something that's really, really important if you want to take your business to the next level?
Yeah. So LawPath is a venture-backed business. So the business model and the path that we've chosen to go down is we have investors, mainly venture capital funds, individual capital investment funds that will invest in us, and that really supercharges our growth. And I didn't have very much access to that industry before I joined LawPath. I'd worked a little bit in the M&A teams at my law firms. I had a little bit of exposure to it, but not too much. And I think there was a very, very steep learning curve early on when you are not only are you trying to run a business, you're also trying to develop a product, and then you're also trying to convince people to invest in you so that you can further grow that product. And so I've now been through 4 rounds of funding, and hopefully I get better and better at it each time. I think that you learn very quickly that, it's very relationship based. People want to work with people they know. People want to work with people that they trust. And so when I came into the industry, I knew no one. And so it took a lot of effort to try and build up those relationships. And really what helped with those relationships was that if I could set a bit of a cadence as to when I spoke to them and give them an update, and I told them I was going to do something, then I came back and said, I've done this, now I'm moving on to the next thing. You slowly build up trust with people, and they say, that's someone who says they're going to do something and then does it. And so by that I mean, we would say, okay, our revenue's at $100,000 and we're going to make it, it's going to get to $1 million within a year. And we go away and we do that, we come back and we say, hey, we're at $1 million now. I'm not asking for any investment. I just wanted you to know because now I'm going for 2 million. And then you go away for 6 months and you get to 2 million. And then when you kind of come back and you say, you know what, hey, I am raising some money for my business. This is what I want to, this is the money I'm raising. This is what I want to do with the money. This is what's going to get me to 5 million. And do you remember the last 2 times I came back to you, I told you I was going to do this and I did it. Well, I'm going to do that again. That formula there, as simple as it sounds, is really, really kind of powerful in getting people to come along. And so I think that was one of the things, kind of building out the relationships early and then really regularly checking in with people. And then the other thing that that you have to become really, really good at if you're going to go down the venture arm or the investment kind of pathway is that you just have to be really good at selling the dream, because typically where you are right now is not enough. It's not big enough. It's too, you need to be saying it's going to be 10 times this, it's going to be 100 times this, because there's different types of investors and different types of investment funds that have different risk profiles and different return mandates. And so typically in the early stage, you're dealing with, angels or early stage investors that have high risk profiles, but they also want to see 10 times their return. And so the business needs to do at least 10 times the size that it is now. And so a lot of it is about thinking, where can the business go? What's it going to do? And, we're very fortunate here in the legal industry because it's $1 trillion industry. It's big. So there is a real opportunity for businesses to come in and take even a small market share. You can still be a really big business, and that's exciting. So yeah, a lot of along the way, lots of different learnings, tons and tons of rejection. I know everyone always talks about the rejection. I know that Canva, the ultimate Australian startup. I know there's that story that Mel from Canva was rejected 100 times before she got her first investment. And I don't think I was rejected 100 times, but it would have been pretty close. And so you just have to get really good at believing in what you're doing, knowing that you do have a big, a big opportunity ahead of you, and then selling and bringing people along on the ride. And people can tell that. You know when you speak to someone, if they're really passionate and they're really dreaming big and they're executing on what they say they're going to do, you can always kind of just tell whether that person is going to do what they say they're going to do. So, LawPath, we're currently looking at another capital round at the moment and starting to think out how we do the messaging. One of the things I'm thinking a lot about at the moment is it's all about storytelling. It's all about being able to tell a story. Like, the numbers back it up, but it's all about being able to tell a story and get people involved and they're buying through the story. And so, they don't teach you that at law school. They don't, well, maybe they do in evidence or something, but it's for a different reason. So, a lot of the skills you learn at uni, you won't, you need different skill sets when you get out into the real world. I think that I have a bit of an opinion on, I think it's still so important that universities do teach the core fundamentals. So, like, for example, we've both done law degrees. It is the Priestley 11, right? Like, here are the 11 subjects that you need to learn to get a base on law. And I really believe we shouldn't sway too far from that. Then I think it's the role of, electives and additional subjects plus internships that give you the soft skills on top. I know that there's a lot of unis out there now that do legal technology courses, and I think that's fantastic, but I think it's really important that you get the core fundamentals first, because throughout my career now, I've worked in corporate law, I've worked in the court system as a defense lawyer, and I've worked in legal technology. So that's three very opposite ends of the legal industry. And throughout them all, I've always needed the core legal skills. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. And even now, I don't practice anymore, but as a CEO, I'm still using a lot of my legal skills. So yeah, I think that baseline, sometimes I think I put, my university going through and working on the core subjects, and then my grounding as working at a larger company and understanding how larger companies work. Even though when I left, I said, I don't want to work for a large company anymore. I want to work for a small business. I still apply a lot of the rules and a lot of the things that I learned in the larger business to my business now.
No, I think that's very, very interesting. I guess the world of funding venture capital, I feel like that's been a very relatively recent rise. And I feel like a lot of my peers and a lot of people, I guess, my age, are very much getting into that world. But it wasn't the case, or at least didn't feel like it was super popular maybe 5-10 years ago, when you were trying to find LawPath and get funding and things like that. Were there any particular, conversations that you had with people that pushed you along in that journey? Because I assume from what I understand, you did a lot of, obviously, of that founding yourself. And so what kind of motivation do you think that you received along the way that helped you push along? And were there instances where you thought that, no, it's time to pack it up, it's time to go, or, times when you didn't feel like it was going to be something that would go through?
Yeah. So two very good questions in there. So I'll cover the first one. So around, startups, venture capital, you're right. Like there's just been an explosion over the last probably 10 years into this space. And, what we saw is the Ubers and the Airbnbs and any of those coming through, startups going through billion-dollar or multi-billion-dollar IPOs, huge returns for the investors. And so what that meant is suddenly everyone was like, well, I'm going to get into this space. So I think what that's meant now is that in a good way, there's a lot more funds out there that are willing to invest. Whereas, when we started LawPath 2015, there were probably 20 venture capital funds in Australia. Now there's hundreds. So the flip side of that is there's also hundreds of startups trying to get their money as well. So I don't know if it's become less or more competitive, probably more competitive. But I think it's a really exciting space. I think that, right now we're in an interesting spot where 2021 was very, very hot for these markets. Lots and lots of funds, lots and lots of capital raises being done. We see them all the time in the paper. 2022 has been a lot slower. People are a little bit worried about a recession. People are a little bit worried about what's going to happen in the US. So we're seeing less deployment of funds. I think it's a small blip. I think if you kind of zoom out a little bit, you will still see that funding of these type of businesses continues on. To the second part of your question, which was really around, a network or building a network of people you can rely on. I think that is key. Whenever I talk to small businesses or startups, one of the things I always try and say is that you're never too small or too young to create your own advisory board. You might think that advisory boards are just reserved for the large Telstras and Optuses of the world, but they're not. You're never too small to have one. And I think why it is so important is that it's a really, really tough run. You really have to have a lot of resilience and grit to get through it, because you're creating something incredible, which is a business that didn't exist before, into something that's thriving and generating jobs and revenue and helping customers. And I think we look around, we see all these businesses and we think, oh, it's not that special to do that. That is really, really difficult to create something out of nothing. And I love walking into my office these days, and I don't love, it's not that I like looking at the profit and loss statement or, my shares go up. What I love is I love walking in and saying there's 75 people in this office that I built a job for, and they support their families because of what we're doing. And I think that's a real motivator for me around the team. But to get there, as you said, there's a lot of ups and downs. You need a support network around you. So I do have some advice that I think works well here, which is one, never be too afraid or nervous to reach out to people in the industry that you're going into and just asking them if they can be an unofficial advisor. You'd be so surprised how many people are quite honored when they get contacted by someone saying, hey, you built an awesome video podcasting platform. You built a really good one. I'm trying to build one as well. Do you think that you could help me along on my journey? Most people will reach out. Most people will say yes. They'll say, you know what, I'd love to give back to you. So don't be afraid to kind of do that. Don't be afraid to even reach out to people that you think might be a competitor one day. The market's really big. So you want to build a network around you of people that have done it before. You want to build a network around you of people that can that are not potential investors, because they're, if you are looking for investment, you want to make sure that those investors, they get the messaging and the story that you want to tell them. You know, they're not the right people at the early stages to be the ones going and saying, "Oh, this isn't going to work. I don't know if this business is going to work." That's not what they want to hear, right? So you want to make sure you've got some people around you that you can have those type of conversations with. And then I think the last thing, and this is always really challenging, but if you can get a co-founder on your journey, if she can come along with you or he can come along with you, and you can bounce ideas off each other, that is always really powerful. I think it's hard to find someone it's all about timing, right? Like, you know, it's really hard to find someone right at that point when you're ready to go and jump into and try a new business, to find someone that's willing to do that with you. But if you can, it helps so much down the track. I know there are a lot of meetups and Facebook pages and groups and things like that you can try and find co-founders, and I think it's hard. It's so hard. You're not just going to turn up to the first set of drinks and be like, "Oh my God, here's my co-founder. We're going to run a business for 10 years together." It just doesn't happen. But if you can keep looking and keep going to kind of industry events and getting more and more niche, you'll eventually find someone who has the same passion as you. And if you can work together, then they're awesome to bring on the journey. And you know, some people turn around to me and say, "Oh, it was my idea, you know, I don't want to share it with anyone else. You know, I don't want to bring on a technical co-founder, or I don't want to bring on someone, I'm technical, I don't want to bring on someone commercial." And my response is always to them, you know, would you prefer 100% of $1,000 business or 50% of $1 million business? You know, it's early on, yes, you know, be clever about how you issue equity and how you think about who owns the business. But honestly, if you hold on too tight, 10 years down the track, you're still going to be 100% owner of a tiny company, or one that never got off the ground. So I think you've got to take a couple of risks early on, and one of those risks sometimes is telling people about what you're doing and getting them involved.
Yeah, wow. I think that's a really interesting point you touch on, and I think it does leave time for one question that I've been really dying to ask you based on some of the research that I did. Was that I read that in sort of early 2020 you were able to go to Silicon Valley, and you actually were able to speak to Justin Kan, you know, co-founder of Twitch, and subsequently co-founded Atrium, which obviously went bust, and obviously a lot of things happened around that. How was that experience for you? How was that, I guess, as a founder in a relatively very, very similar space, with a co-founder, I guess, who has a lot of cachet behind him, and seeing all that? How was those conversations, and what was that experience like for you?
Yeah. So I was lucky enough to go over a couple of years ago. I think what really excited me about the Atrium. So for those of you that don't know, Atrium was a large kind of legal / technology business that started in 2019. Founder of Twitch, sold to Amazon for $1 billion. Justin Kan, this was his next startup. And so for us in the legal tech world, this was huge, because never before had a very kind of well-known, well-backed, famous person really gone full steam. I think he raised $130 or $140 million straight away to launch this business. And for me, the reason that I kind of reached out to him and then got the invitation to go over was because I wanted to understand what they were doing. I wanted to understand how they were thinking about the market. And I actually kind of thought that this was going to be, you know, I've been waiting for the inflection point in legal tech, in terms of, it's this huge, we know, we've already talked about it, it's this huge business, massive market, yet legal technology or online delivery of legal services is still only about 8% of the total market. So there's still, and compare that with accounting where it's 70%. So there's still a long way to go. And I felt like maybe Atrium might be this inflection point where we're seeing, you know, a startup coming in, raising a lot of funds and going for it. When I went over there, I learned a lot. I spent a couple of days in the office. It was really cool, actually. So not only was Justin Kan there, but he invited a lot of his friends in. So we had the co-founders of Reddit were there, co-founders of a couple of other large startup businesses in San Fran. And so, you know, just one to go over and kind of see what the top end of the startup space was in America was pretty incredible. And then learning a little bit more about his business model and how it was working. And, you know, what he was doing was he was trying to solve the problem, which is there is not enough software in legal yet. And so, he was trying to bring down the costs of legal by introducing software. And I think, unfortunately, that business didn't work out, and he ended up giving a lot of the money back to his investors. But what was kind of clear when I was there was that there were two distinct models within Atrium. There was a law firm and a technology business, and my assumption was that the idea behind it was, let's grow both of them, and then as we grow and we build momentum, we'll merge. So because always it's chicken and the egg, right? You want to get customers in the door so you're generating revenue, so you can justify more R&D, so you can build the product. And so there's a flywheel that you need to get going. And I think what happened in Atrium's kind of case was that the law firm grew quite quickly, that the software didn't integrate as quickly as they wanted, and so they kind of felt that I think it kind of essentially the momentum kind of slowed down. And so I brought a ton of learnings back. That trip was very successful because not only did I see the Atrium team, but I actually met with LegalZoom, who's our largest investor. They're the world's largest legal tech company. So they invested in us on that trip. So it wasn't a total it was a very useful trip. But I think one of the big learnings for me there was that if you are going to build a disruptive business model, it's very difficult to do it from within an incumbent or within an incumbent model. So what I mean by that is, I think, and it's not impossible, and some people have done it, but I think it's more challenging if you are a traditional law firm or running a traditional law firm model. You have to disrupt yourself, and that's really hard because you're essentially, breaking your model and rebuilding it for something that's probably got lower margins and not as profitable. And you really don't see the benefits of that model until you hit scale. And so I look at a lot of the law firms that start their own software businesses these days, and I always think it's going to be tough for that to work because it's very hard to build a disruptive model from within a traditional model. The incentives are just not aligned. I think the ones that do it really well are the ones that outsource or spin up a new entity and kind of build out the model, the disruptive model outside. And one of the things I've seen work really well is that you can't place the same kind of success metrics on the model. So what I mean by that is, if you have a law firm that wants to build let's say, contract automation software, contract management system, very popular these days. You can't say to the people on that team, "Oh, you need to be as profitable as the law firm next year because otherwise we'll choose the law firm," because it just doesn't work like that. You need to have a couple of years to get the model up and running.
No, I think it's a very, very interesting point because I think most people, I guess prior to that, you wouldn't have had a lot of experience, I guess, in that kind of world. And I think, particularly in the current market, I think people would be quite interesting being in the room where you get to see so many founders together and take those learnings back to, I guess, an organization that you're running that is a very, not similar, but I guess is in a similar market to the kind of founder that you're talking with. Thank you very much. I think that sort of runs us out of time. But I thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think you touched on some really good points. And I think there's a lot for the audience to take out of it and, I guess, implement in their own life if they find relevant.
Awesome. Look, really good to chat to you today. If anyone ever wants to reach out to me, hit me up on Twitter at dwoolrych or find me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to chat with people. If you want to learn more about legal technology or capital raising or LawPath in general, very, very happy to chat. But thanks. Good questions today. I like the questions that are a little bit more, outside the box. I think the conversations are always better when you've thought through the questions. So thank you.
No, you're welcome. Look, I'm very glad you enjoyed your time on the podcast. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, Aaron.